In the middle of a charity event in Miami, Shaquille O'Neal took the microphone and made a confession about Jimmy Butler that no one knew or expected. What this giant man said must have shaken Jimmy so much that his eyes welled up in front of hundreds of people. That moment didn't just reveal the relationship between two legends. It completely changed the atmosphere in the room, because Shaq's statements would go down as one of the most honest confrontations in NBA history. Before we dive into this intriguing confession, take a second to subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, like the video, and I'll read your comments at the end of the story. If you're ready for this shocking tale, let's begin. As October's pastel-colored sun painted the waters of Biscayne Bay orange, a light ocean breeze swept through the Miami skies. Inside the hall, a tense excitement filled the air, proving that this was no ordinary evening. The Kaseya Center was filled not with the cheers of thousands of fans, but with a select group of approximately 500 guests. Among them were war veterans, their families, local children from Miami, and lucky individuals who had earned the right to attend this evening through generous donations. Backstage, there was a flurry of activity, but no panic. Crew members were making final adjustments to the lighting, and the sound systems were undergoing their last checks. The familiar scent of the wooden floor, mixed with sweat and cleaning supplies, lingered in the air, evoking memories for every basketball fan. Shaquille O'Neal stood at the entrance to the locker room. He held a tiny coffee cup in his enormous hands and looked around carefully. Despite being 51 years old, he still stood out with his 2.1 skeets-meter height and massive shoulders. His dark navy suit was carefully tailored. Dressing someone like Shaq had never been an easy task, but there was something different about his gaze that evening. His usual relaxed demeanor had been replaced by a slight uneasiness. At the other end of the hallway, Jimmy Butler appeared to be chatting with a group of children. For these kids from East Miami, this was a night they would never forget. At 35, Jimmy still had the same youthful energy he had at the beginning of his career. He was wearing a white polo shirt and dark jeans. Simple, but carefully chosen. "Jimmy, can you really shoot the ball into the basket no matter where you throw it?" asked a boy of about 12, his eyes filled with admiration. Jimmy smiled proudly. It was a smile that had won the hearts of basketball fans around the world. He bent down to the child's eye level and replied, "Actually, I miss a lot more than you see on TV," he said. "But you know what you don't see? Hours and hours of practice every day. What you see on the court is just the tip of the iceberg, kid." A little girl of about 10 years old, wearing a faded Heat t-shirt, raised her hand boldly. "My grandmother always says that you put Miami on the world map. Is that true?" This question paused Jimmy for a moment. His eyes deepened for a moment, because Miami wasn't just a city to him. It was like home. It was the soil where his roots, his character, and his career had sprouted. "Miami was on the map long before I was, little lady," he said with a smile and a soft expression. "But yes, being a part of this city, growing up with its spirit, is a source of pride for me." 20 feet away, Shaq watched the scene silently and curiously. Jimmy's natural way of connecting with the children both fascinated and disturbed him. At the height of his career, Shaq often participated in charity events and gave back to the community. But he always felt like he was playing a role, the role of the accessible giant. With Jimmy, nothing was forced. He was professional, as always. At that moment, Darnell Lewis, a veteran reporter for the Miami Herald, approached cautiously. "Shaq, it'll be great to see you on stage with Jimmy. Have you ever spoken one-on-one?" he asked. The question was simple, but it evoked tensions that had been in the media for years. Because Shaq had repeatedly criticized the modern style of basketball, especially the three-point-based game. And if Jimmy Butler wasn't the symbol of this change, then who was? Shaq said diplomatically, "We've crossed paths a couple of times at league events. He's a good kid, he's talented." But Darnell noticed the tiny pause before Shaq's sentence. It was as if he wanted to say more, but was holding himself back. Meanwhile, as Jimmy was saying goodbye to the kids, his assistant Andre approached quietly. "Jimmy, there's less than 15 minutes left before the event starts. Do you want to rest for a bit?" Jimmy shook his head, but his eyes involuntarily drifted toward Shaq for a moment. In the crowded hallway, They locked eyes for just 3 to 5 seconds. There was no greeting, no smile, just a few seconds of pure, blank stare. But in that glance, there was the tension of years yet to be revealed. And Jimmy remembered what Shaq had said on a podcast months ago. Today's basketball isn't masculine anymore. Everyone wants to look good, shoot from far away. No one wants to get in there and fight. These words had struck Jimmy deeper than he thought. Even though he had won 4 NBA championships in his career, those words hit him hard, because the person who said them was Shaquille O'Neal, his childhood hero. His power, his legendary presence, was one of the most important elements that shaped Jimmy's basketball dream. He walked toward the inner part of the corridor. The section leading to the locker rooms of the Kaseya Center was quieter, away from the buzz of the crowd in the arena. On the walls hung photos of the Miami Heat's greatest achievements from past to present. Jimmy paused for a moment in front of the photo of the 2013 championship celebration. LeBron, Wade, Bosh. That photo was a turning point for him. That year, he had seen what the pinnacle of this game looked like. Just then, the sound of heavy footsteps echoing behind him caught his attention. Only a few people in this world could make the floor rattle like that when they walked. "Jimmy!" Shaq's deep voice echoed through the hallway. Jimmy slowly turned around. Now they were alone, just the two of them. There were no cameras, no spectators watching them. Just two men, in the middle of a confrontation that carried the silent tension of years. "Jimmy," Shaq said, his voice calm, but with a clear hint of curiosity. "How are you?" Shaq seemed to be searching for the right words. There was an unusual look in his eyes, determination mixed with hesitation. "I need to tell you something," he said, taking a deep breath, "and I think I need to say it in front of everyone." Those words stopped Jimmy in his tracks. He fixed his eyes on Shaq. There was a look of readiness in his eyes. Something was coming. "Are you sure?" Jimmy asked, his tone becoming a little more serious. "What you're saying sounds like a big deal." Shaq clenched his fists and then opened them again. The tension was palpable in his body language. "I've been carrying this feeling inside me for a long time," he said, "and now it's time to be honest." At that moment, they both knew. When they returned to the event venue, nothing would be the same, because Shaq's announcement would resonate not only with the two of them, but with millions of people. Their return to the main hall of the Kaseya Center seemed perfectly timed. Ahmad Rashad was on stage with a microphone, inviting the legends participating in the event to the stage one by one. Magic Johnson had just given an emotional speech about overcoming adversity. The hall was filled with positive energy. When Shaq and Jimmy entered the hall, a buzz began among the audience. Children, veterans, families, and guests all turned their eyes toward the two stars. They were now bathed in the dazzling spotlights. Ahmad recognized the opportunity. With a huge smile on his face, he announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, here are two legends representing two different eras of basketball, Shaquille O'Neal and Jimmy Butler." The hall erupted in applause. Jimmy stood on the sidelines. Shaq walked forward with unusual seriousness. Everyone was surprised to see Shaq, who was usually known for his humorous and relaxed demeanor, looking so serious. "Ahmad," said Shaq, pointing to the microphone, "can I say a few words?" This request surprised not only Ahmad, but the entire hall. Shaq usually avoided speaking and left the cameras to others. Ahmad handed him the microphone. Shaq walked to the center of the Kaseya Center. This was the place where he had fought countless battles throughout his career. He stood in the middle of the parquet floor where victories, defeats, and memories had accumulated. He held the microphone and took a deep breath. "First of all, good evening to everyone in the arena," he said, his voice echoing through the arena's sound system. "What I'm about to tell you is something I've never told anyone before." The arena fell silent. Even the children were listening intently. Jimmy stood on the sidelines, feeling his heart race. He didn't know what was coming, but he sensed that it was important. "Throughout my career, I've always been known as the big man. I used my physical strength to my advantage, and for many years, I had strong opinions about how basketball should be played," Shaq said. He paused for a moment, then turned his head and fixed his gaze on Jimmy. "When Jimmy Butler started changing the game, I resisted it and criticized it. I even said that the game had lost its essence. The journalists in the room grabbed their pens and cell phones. Everyone knew that this was a historic moment that would never be repeated. Shaq's voice began to tremble slightly. But today, here, I want to confess a truth that has weighed heavily on me for years, he said. He paused. All eyes in the room were on him. I was wrong, and I was wrong in a big way. These words fell like a bomb in the room. Shaq, one of the most powerful figures in NBA history, was admitting a mistake on live TV. Tears began to well up in his eyes, but his voice remained trembling, yet clear. I criticized Jimmy because he showed me a form of greatness that I could never achieve. Jimmy stood frozen in place on the court. He had never even imagined hearing such a proud confession, not even in his wildest dreams. Jimmy's legs trembled. He had played countless games and experienced countless final moments on the court, but the confession he was hearing now filled him with a completely different emotion: respect, acceptance, forgiveness. Shaq turned his eyes to the children sitting in the front row. "Do you want to know the truth, kids?" he said, his voice now fragile but courageous. "I watched all of Jimmy's games in secret, after everyone had gone to sleep and I was alone, silently, in awe. The silence in the hall was almost sacred. Even the photographers had stopped pressing the shutter buttons. Everyone surrendered to the magic of the moment." Shaq turned his eyes back to Jimmy. He slowly began to walk toward him, "because that giant man showed me that something beyond physical strength is possible." He took what life gave him, a body that was considered inadequate for the NBA, and turned it into a superpower. Now the tears were flowing, but his voice remained strong. Reaching out his hands, he said, "Jimmy, come here, brother." Jimmy began to walk as if hypnotized. With each step, an invisible bond formed between him and the crowd. Hundreds of people in the hall held their breath. In the middle, right in the center of Kaseya Center, a giant and a warrior now stood side by side. Shaq placed his hand on Jimmy's shoulder. "I owe you an apology," he said. "For years, I criticized you. I resisted. I refused to acknowledge the greatness I saw before my own eyes. But not today. Today, failing to see your greatness is my own shortcoming." Jimmy's throat tightened. The man who had been his childhood hero was now opening up to him. But this wasn't just an apology. It was a confession, a surrender. Shaq continued, "You didn't ruin basketball, Jimmy. You improved it. You took everything our generation built and added something more beautiful, more inclusive, more inspiring." The elderly NBA players in the room nodded, some wiping away tears. The children, having forgotten the autographed balls they held in their hands, listened and watched intently, unable to look away. Shaq lowered his voice slightly, but its impact grew exponentially. "And you know what? I learned my biggest lesson from you. Greatness doesn't come in one form." He locked his gaze on Jimmy's eyes. "For years, I thought that greatness meant being like me, being physically dominant, instilling fear on the court. But you showed me that giving others hope is also a form of greatness." Jimmy finally found the strength to speak. "Shaq," he said, his voice trembling but determined, "all I ever wanted was to be respected by legends like you, because your era is still the greatest in my eyes." Shaq replied without looking away, "And because of men like you, our legacy hasn't been destroyed. It's only grown stronger." Shaq took a step back, picked up the microphone again, and turned to the rest of the room. Jimmy Butler pushed the limits not of physical strength, but of faith and determination. And because of that, skinny kids all over the world can dream about playing this game. Because they say, if he can do it, so can I. All eyes in the room were now on Jimmy. Shaq continued, his voice trembling. "And that was a greatness I could never achieve. I used to scare people, but you show people that they should believe in themselves." There was a brief silence. Jimmy couldn't hold back his tears anymore. He took the microphone, his voice a little hoarse. "Shaq, what you said means everything to me, because when I was a kid, I never missed any of your videos. You were like a wall on the court, unbeatable and unshakable." A small child in the front row had his eyes locked on Jimmy. In a way, that child was like Jimmy years ago. "But I turned your toughness into strength within myself. I took your physical strength and turned it into spiritual strength. Shaq nodded. They understood each other completely now. Jimmy continued. But if you only knew when I struggled the most, he said, his voice coming from much deeper this time. Do you know when my heart was broken the most? Everyone in the room leaned forward. The tension was palpable. When you said on that podcast, these kids are destroying the essence of basketball, I couldn't sleep that night, because those words couldn't have come from someone I respected from the outside, but from someone I respected from the inside. Shaq bowed his head. Perhaps it was at that moment that he truly felt how valuable his words were, and what a huge impact they had made. Jimmy continued. The night I won my first championship, I went home and cried. Not out of joy, but out of relief, because I had finally reached the top on my own. Do you know what the first thought that crossed my mind was? Shaq was silent. He just listened. I wondered if Shaq would finally appreciate me. These words shook Shaq to his core. It was an indescribable feeling to know that even after such a great achievement, someone was still waiting for the approval of their childhood hero. Shaq could only say, his voice sad and trembling, Do you know, Jimmy, my respect for you didn't start that night. It started long before that. I just didn't have the courage to admit it. The two hugged each other tightly once again. The applause and whistles echoed throughout the hall and didn't seem to stop. But this time, the applause wasn't just for the two star players. They were applause for being human, for growing up, and for facing the truth. The hall was filled with tears, smiles, admiration, and inspiration. That moment was not only a historic day for basketball, but also a unique day in terms of human relationships. Kenny Smith leaned toward Charles Barkley in the front row and whispered, Chuck, I've been in the NBA for 30 years, but this is the first time I've ever experienced a day like this. Barkley, known for his humorous tone, responded seriously, his eyes welling up. This isn't basketball, Kenny. This is two men having the courage to be completely honest with each other. As the applause continued, Shaq and Jimmy remained hugging each other. People approached them respectfully, but without touching their embrace. Ahmad Rashad, with years of experience, took the microphone again, but even he knew that this moment was too beautiful and special to be interrupted. He remained silent for a moment, then began speaking in simple words. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe everyone in this room has just witnessed something extraordinary. The hall erupted once more in applause and cheers. Ahmad continued, What do you think? Can Shaq and Jimmy stay with us a little longer and continue this conversation together? The resounding applause from the audience approved the offer. The children in the front row waited with bated breath. Shaq took the microphone again, but this time, there was a completely different tone in his voice. There was no more tension, shame, or resentment. It had been replaced by a light-hearted, sincere peace. You know, he said, walking toward the children, all my life, I had to appear strong. I was taught never to show my feelings, because strength meant never showing weakness. A girl in the second row timidly raised her hand. Shaq bent down, trying to get down to her level despite his 2.16-meter height. Yes, princess? Go ahead, he said softly. The girl asked him sincerely, Are you and Jimmy friends now, sir? This question caused a big, sweet laugh in the room, but Shaq's answer touched everyone's hearts. You know, I don't just want to be friends. I want to work with him, teach with him, because together, we want to teach kids like you that there are different ways to be great. Jimmy came over to them. He took the microphone and said, Even I've started coming up with some great and different ideas. What do you say, Shaq? Can we open basketball clinics where we teach traditional physical play and modern technical play together? Shaq's eyes lit up. Exactly. Let's show them that there are different ways for everyone to succeed. Some can be physically dominant like me, some can play technically flawless like Jimmy, or some can find their own style. The kids in the gym were excited, but one of them raised his hand eagerly, eager to speak. A war veteran in his mid-40s stood up, wearing a warrior t-shirt. Ahmed immediately handed him the spare microphone. When the man took the microphone, his voice was trembling but determined. Listen, gentlemen, I'm a veteran who served in Afghanistan. What you're doing here today, this is true leadership. You've shown everyone here and out there that even strong men can change their minds, grow, and admit their mistakes. This is exactly what our children need to see. Shaq and Jimmy's eyes welled up. Jimmy took the microphone. Thank you for your words. And for your service. What impressed me most is your belief in the power of change, to start over and find the right thing. Shaq nodded in agreement. That's right, my friend. In life, as in basketball, the greatest victories sometimes come after the biggest mistakes. That's what I learned here today. After what had happened, the conversation began to flow like a group of friends, no longer bound by a program. Other veterans shared their stories. The talk of change, adaptation, and inner transformation turned the hall into a learning circle. About an hour later, the event ended, but Shaq and Jimmy were still there. They had spent time with almost every child individually, taking pictures and listening to their stories, even answering all their questions. Finally, they stepped out into the hallway, the same place where the evening had begun but had a completely different meaning. Jimmy asked, "Can I ask you something? Why did you confess this today? Why tonight?" Shaq thought for a moment. "Do you want to know the truth? Because I saw you talking to those kids. I saw your light in their eyes, and I realized that..." Jimmy waited. "I was resisting when I could have learned from someone like you. But you took the initiative and showed me that greatness is possible without belittling others." These words made Jimmy proud again and deeply affected him. It was clear that a real transformation was taking place at that very moment. Jimmy smiled. "Do you think what happened tonight changed the history of basketball?" Shaq replied sincerely, "I hope so, because from now on, when someone asks, traditional basketball or modern basketball, people will remember that it's not a battle, but different chapters of the same beautiful story." And after that night, Jimmy and Shaq embarked on the same journey together. A true partnership was born. The basketball clinics they opened in disadvantaged areas across the country provided not only technical training, but also character education. Their videos went viral, were shown in schools, and young people learned not only basketball, but also humanity from them. But the most valuable thing for them was something else. It was teaching that two different worlds, two different bodies, and two different journeys could come together in a common greatness. And perhaps most importantly, it was seeing that true friendships can be born even after the longest disagreements. What did you learn from Jimmy and Shaq's decisive moment? Please share your thoughts in the comments, because this topic deserves a real discussion.